What we're going to try to do today is to, based on climate, based on geography, based on like culture, politics, history, and kind of see whether that has influenced some of their most well-known dishes. And I will, in each of these sections, I will tell you what are, some of the most well-known cuisines from that province. There's a bigger reliance on things like wheat, on things like millet. The Confucians were also a group that liked things a certain way. They were also the kind of like the history takers. And I'm sitting on my trash can right now, which is the perfect height, and I should have always done this because it's like the perfect height, but it's also like small, so it fits into this little groove bit. Anyhow, hello, have not seen you all in a little bit. I had wanted to do this great kind of like 8 different cuisines of China video for you all, but it ended up bringing me into these very good but very in-depth rabbit holes, and it ended up just taking me just forever. Like I would be like, oh, I wonder how this is influenced by history, and then I would go into all of the dynasties of China, and then like days and days later after reading through everything, I'm just like, oh, I don't know if that necessarily helped at all. But anyways, today I kind of just wanted to present the big cuisines of China, which China has themselves divided up into 8 specific regions. And in particular, I think why this is particularly important for us is because we are predominantly a recipes channel. A lot of the times I kind of feel like just by even grouping it into, oh, it's just Chinese food, it's like haphazardly bringing all of these different things and then just calling it, like basic, like Chinese food. When a lot of people are wondering like, oh, well, if that's Chinese food and that's Chinese food, how come that tastes sour, or like that's really spicy? Or how come when we're making them in our kitchens, how come the technique of like cooking it, frying, baking, whatever, how come that's also so different? What is nice about this is I think it will just help us organize a little bit and group it a little bit better. And for me to present it in a more organized fashion to you all as well, instead of just calling this like Chinese blah 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 tofu, we can say, okay, well, this is from the northeastern region, this is from Anhui, this is from one of our like great 8. And I think what's also nice outside of this channel is I know a lot of you enjoy watching like travel vlogs and like different, travel videos that way. So it would be nice for whoever you follow along when you know the region to kind of just be like, okay, like, was this kind of what we had talked about in this video, or like, are we adding something new? Like for me anyways, what I started to do is look for my favorite, vloggers from China, favorite like recipe makers from China, and I find out, okay, like what regions are they from? Is this like Shandong? Is it up north? Is it south? Whatever. And I'll start like, maybe I don't actually note it down, but I'll start mentally noting down like, okay, like I can see that these are the common types of ingredients that they use. This is the common kind of cooking methods, or like, similar flavors, similar cooking styles, similar kinds of food, and whether I can even find that similarity, because things don't always fall under the category that it's intended to. There are certain regions where it's like, oh, for sure, like they use Sichuan peppercorn, blah, 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 blah. And all of those flavors, like they seem to gel and they seem to make sense in that region. But a lot of the recipes that we see today, or the foods that we see today, they're quite recent. Like China has had many reinventions of itself. Obviously now it's a lot easier to have similar ingredients all over because, distribution methods are so much better. What I mean to say is, even though we are trying to group a lot of these things together based on certain qualities and characteristics, some of them I also was like, okay, that just simply doesn't fit. I think what I want to do is, as we go into each of the regions' cuisines, I would like to do kind of a more in-depth video of like, okay, section 1, we're doing Shandong, and then go really in depth into it, and then do a couple of recipes from there, and then yada yada. So let me just give you a general overview of first up how these 8 regions work. So actually, initially, China during the Tang Dynasty, they divided up the cuisine into 4, and that could have just been how the empire was during that time, which regions were most influential. So last dynasty in China, the Qing dynasty, so that's from 1644 to 1912, they added 4 more cuisines to this, which was the Zhejiang province, Fujian province, Hunan, and then Anhui. And even with these big 8, we're still, China is so big, we're still leaving out big regions. For example, anybody that watches like Dianxi Xiaoge, Chinese country core, she's out there in Yunnan. She's down south. I feel like it's somewhat similar to like Thai cuisine. Down south, that's not really covered in this big 8. If you're from New York, there's the Xi'an noodles, which comes from Shanxi region. That's also it's not all covered. But then again, borders and regions, that's like a very modern thing, to need passports to go everywhere. Like, that's a very modern thing. And so just because there is this divide doesn't mean that, a region specifically, just does this. You'll find that regions that are next to each other, probably very, very similar. In terms of China's geography, size-wise, it is very similar to the US. China, you have the Tibetan mountains, the plateaus to the west, those are going to be higher. Different elevations affect, different things. You have up to the north, Inner Mongolia plateaus, and up in the north, a lot of grassland. To the east, there are plains. A really big thing in terms of understanding Chinese cuisine first is to take a look at a map. A big giveaway is that a lot of these regions are actually towards that coast, towards that eastern coast of China. So one of the big things to note after you familiarize yourself with the map is that rivers and waterways, historically, in the past, rivers and waterways have really dictated the kinds of cuisines in a region, simply because rivers and water bring life. It makes ground fertile. It brings transportation. 2 big rivers in China that you also need to know, in addition to the provinces, is the Yellow River, Huanghe, in the north, and then the Yangtze River in the south. So how the rivers divide up China is that definitely north of the Yellow River, but for sure north of the Yangtze River, there's a bigger reliance on things like wheat, on things like millet, okay? Places that are drier, which is up north, drier places, higher elevations, these certain types of grains grow really well in it, like barley, millet, these heavier types of things. And so you'll see that for sure the north, there's a heavier reliance on wheat, on millet. Specifically millet, I think, because nowadays, like, wheat is readily available in north and south, and you can, distribute that all over. But specifically millet, I find is quite clear. Like, anytime I see a Chinese recipe with millet, generally it follows that it's, a little bit more north. And then south of that, obviously, is rice. Rice just grows better in these kind of like semi-tropical type areas. And so that is kind of the big north-south divide. First one up is Lu Cai, Shandong cuisine. So Shandong is a province up north, northeast. It is part of the northern China plain. Weather-wise, January, in Celsius, 4 to -3. In July, it's like around 21 Celsius. They don't always call Shandong cuisine like Shandong cuisine. The Lu comes from, there's regions in each province. And so in the region of Lu is the birthplace of Confucius, which is some of the things that Shandong is known for. And so that is why they call their cuisine Lu cuisine. If you look it up, Confucius had some things to say about food too, and not eating spoiled food. And we can go and look into Confucius some more, but he had, good ideals, but the Confucians were also a group that liked things a certain way. They were also the kind of like the history takers. They would write the history of China. And so if you were an emperor, an empress that did not get along well with the Confucians, they might just write you out. They might not write the best things on your account. And so Shandong, northeast, known, I tried to find these like facts for you that people would know. Tsingtao beer. A bunch of German immigrants were there, and then they ended up starting a brewery. This is part of the Big Four. So Shandong, because it's up north, there have been many Chinese capitals, dynasty capitals that have been up north as well. This is a region that is very much associated with imperial cuisine. It's known for its complexity, its freshness, its difficulty, its quality of ingredients. One of the techniques is like cutting meat into flowers. I've seen this in terms of like fish before, where you cut crisscrosses in the meat, but you don't cut it all the way through, so that when you fry it afterwards, it kind of like blooms. Some other recipes, it's like whipped egg whites with pureed chicken poached in oil. So like a lot of these like very fancy type cuisines. It's also home to a lot of salt trays. What you'll find is that because, again, each of these provinces are so big, there's going to be different styles within each province. And so Shandong usually is divided into kind of like 3 different cuisine types. There's the Jiangsu style. So Jiangsu is a region along the coast. It is this peninsula along the coast, and so it is more heavy in seafood. Inland, you have the Jinan style. Actually, what people say is that they like specific flavors. So like each dish has a particular flavor. We're not mixing flavors. One dish has this flavor, the next dish has this flavor. I don't totally understand what that means, because most dishes have multiple flavors. So we will go and look into that. So the Jinan style. And then also the more elaborate kind of Confucian, imperial type cuisines that we had talked about there. Some of the foods that Shandong is known for: red braised abalone, scallion braised sea cucumber, fresh carp with sweet and sour sauce. And then there's this dish that they take the intestines and they braise them in this like brown sauce. So yeah, those are some of the dishes in Shandong. People also say that they really like their vinegar, and it's like a vinegar that is very different from the rest of China. So jjajangmyeon is from Beijing as well, but this Shandong region, it doesn't really cover like the great northeast, because there's places like Beijing, there's places like Tianjin, and that gets all lumped into this region, even though this region doesn't really expand over there. Some of the known cooking styles in the Shandong province includes, one is bao, which is like boop, like, so you have some oil that's really hot, and then you cook your meats or whatever in it, so that the initial high heat kind of seals the meat, seals in all of the juices, and then you continue cooking it, whatever way. And so that's one of them. And then jia, deep frying, but it's the one where you dip like the meat in a little bit of starch first, like cornstarch, and then you fry it, and the starch kind of seals in the meat and all of the juices as well, and then you cook it with something else, like add in some sauce, add in whatever. Let's move on. Okay, so next up with the Big Four is the province of Sichuan. People know Sichuan, it's not Sichuan, it's southwestern China. People probably associate it with hot pot, Sichuan peppercorns, like numbing spices. Sichuan is also home to Chengdu, and people probably know that for pandas. Sichuan, a majority of it is surrounded by mountains. So it's really near kind of the Tibetan plateaus, is quite high up. What happens with all of these like mountains is Sichuan, especially where people live, is essentially a basin. It is a rainy and cold basin. It says 250 to 300 days of the year it is rainy or cloudy. You have fairly cold winters, dry spring, hot summers, rainy autumns. People say that this is the reason that they eat spicy foods, like peppercorns and chili, is to essentially the spiciness clears the damp. It's like everybody has all of these like really like damp bodies in them, and so the spice kind of helps with that dampness, like lifts the damp. So remember when I said like not every place 100% corresponds with like the geography and the climate and whatnot? Sichuan, I think, is one of those provinces where it's clear that the climate, the geography definitely impacts the food, and it has a very kind of clear sense of what it is. It's a much easier region to describe. One of the reasons the Sichuanese cuisine is kind of, I feel like, more clear is because of the Sichuan peppercorn. Anybody who's had it before, they describe it as numbing, as mala. It's spicy, but it's pepper spicy. It's not chili spicy. They're more floral. You have it on your tongue or it touches your lips. It has kind of this like numbing effect. So you'll see that in a lot of the dishes. Like when they cook with it, they just throw some Sichuan pepper in there. So that's like a very clear way of knowing, okay, we're dealing with Sichuanese cuisine. Mapo tofu. Even though a lot of different regions make their own versions of mapo tofu, there is a Sichuan mapo tofu where you add Sichuanese pepper corns. It wasn't until later, so after the Columbian Exchange, we're talking like 1600s, that chilies were brought from the Americas to China, and then places like Sichuan, places like Hunan, these cauldrons of China began using more chilies in their food. Some of the notable foods that you might see from Sichuan: 鱼香肉丝, you have gongbao jiding, you have Sichuan hot pot, kung pao chicken, mapo tofu, twice cooked pork, and then you have this also, it's like a very famous lung, sliced lung dish as well. There are some parts of Sichuan that are also different. Like in the western high plateaus, they enjoy a lot of sun. When you're out of that basin, there's a lot of sun. Next cuisine, Yue cuisine, which is Guangdong cuisine, which is kind of like Cantonese cuisine that I think most people know. They call it Yue because I think there's like a dialect, a particular language spoken, and then, yeah, anyways. So I think Guangdong, or like southern China, this type of cuisine is most known to places like the US, places like the UK, because of immigrations. So like during the 19th century, during the 1800s, you have the gold rush in the US, and kind of the first batch of immigrants that came from China came from this kind of southern, southeastern Guangdong region. And so, naturally, opening up restaurants. Interestingly, in looking up the immigration history for the UK, specifically London, the first Chinese immigrants arrived mid-18th century, so the 1700s, and worked for the East India Company and a place called the Blue Funnel Line, usually as sailors, and then within that as cooks. And I think most people, when they say like Chinese food, like dim sum, like char siu, they associate Chinese food with actually the foods of Guangdong. So I think most people are actually quite familiar with the tastes and the textures from this region. Interestingly, more historically, kind of a little ways back of how Westerners became more known with Guangdong cuisine, as well as during the Qing dynasty, last dynasty again, in China, 1644 to 1912, they had to open up Shanghai to the west. Qing dynasty had to open up Shanghai to the west. It was pretty much during the downfall. So if you want to go into looking up different dynasties of China, the Qing had a good period, and then towards the end, obviously, it was a bad period. They had to concede a lot of different territories to different groups, and people kind of, like, they were like vultures, where I think that they saw a downfall of an empire and that people just wanted to like take land, do things. They had to open up Shanghai to the west, and so there were a fair bit of Westerners in Shanghai as well, but there were also about like 500,000 people from the Guangdong region living and working in Shanghai as well. And so they were able to spread cultures like tea drinking, like, going for tea in the morning, steamed fish, things that were like different from Shanghainese food. They were able to kind of spread that early to Westerners that way. Obviously, southern China, we're now talking about quite humid, hot, subtropical weather. Okay, winters are short. I lived in Hong Kong for a year. Winters were short, but like sometimes they get down to like the 40s Fahrenheit, which is actually pretty warm. So they're relatively mild, relatively dry. Summers are long, hot, they're wet. These are these tropical regions where it's just really wet. But kind of for that reason, this region, it can grow a lot of like rice. It has access to the sea. It has, you know, various ports in it. So this region is very lucky in that it can get a lot of fresh like game and meat and fish. And so what this region is really known for is it's very fresh ingredients and it's very clean, mild, maybe like slightly sweet flavors. And the reason is because being in this region, they have access to so many, you know, different types of meat, different types of game, different types of fish along the sea. And so it's like they're a little bit spoiled in terms of flavor because they just want the flavor of the food to actually be the dish itself. This is kind of the style that I grew up with and cooking wise. So I would say like, yeah, there isn't too many harsh flavors that we do to cover up the food. So like, you know, steamed fish, you might put like some garlic or onions or ginger, although that's already flavoring it. But it is a lot more clean than I would say the rest of China is. We kind of let the flavor of the food speak for itself. But again, that is one chunk of the Guangdong province because like within Guangdong, there's going to be a lot of different groups, minorities, ethnic groups, right? So like my grandmother on my mom's side, they're Hakka, and they also, you know, brought their food along. And I feel like Hakka food, it's like a lot more salty. And she was just talking about like my grandmother in the past, she was just talking about like, well, like, you know, like people were poorer. So sometimes we just have like rice with like soy sauce, or like maybe, you know, the cuts of meat that you had wasn't so fresh, wasn't so good. So you had to find ways to really like amp up the flavor or cover certain flavors. And so even within, you know, Guangdong, this place that's supposed to be like nice and neat and clean, there's going to be other groups in there that influence the style as well. Like some of the signature things would be like clay pot rice, Cantonese steamed fish, kind of like white cut chicken, so like the chicken, which is really untouched, and then you have like a sauce on the side, like a garlic, ginger, whatever sauce. Char siu, which is like your roasted pork. You have wontons, you have egg tarts, you have dim sum as well. So I would say in terms of like cooking style as well, we don't really do a lot of frying. Like steaming, I would say, is a big thing. We don't really use like too much oil, although sometimes, you know, like in restaurants they do, but like I guess like at home it's a little bit different. But I would say like as a whole, like when you compare it to like, let's say like Sichuanese hot pot. Sichuanese hot pot is literally like a chunk of like lard and oil that you like dip into the hot pot. And so part of the, a huge portion I feel like of the broth is just like, it's like very oily, it's very hot. But when you compare it to Cantonese cooking, yeah, a lot of it is just like a lighter like steam, or like when you cook it, it's not with that much oil, it's not that strong. We kind of want to preserve the texture and the flavor of the food because, again, it's very lucky that they have access to so many of these ingredients. Being down south, it's warmer. There's just more water, more sea, more different kinds of game. So that is Guangdong cuisine. We need to move on. Okay, so this is the fourth in the original Big Four region. We're talking about the region of Jiangsu, so Su cuisine. Jiangsu is a region located in kind of the northeast. It's under Shandong, which is the first one that we talked about. It is also kind of the region that's closest to Shanghai. Shanghai is its own kind of special region province, but it very much kind of is in the surrounding areas of it. Jiangsu reminds me kind of a lot of Shandong because it is up north. there is a lot of imperial influences, specifically, more so, I think, in this one as well. So historically, we have a couple of dynasties, so like the Han, the Sui, the Tang dynasty, kind of making it a special kind of administrative region. So that brought in economy, that brought in wealth. The Sui dynasty, which there's a lot of dates and whatnot, so I'm going to just leave those out. And they built this big grand canal system that connected the north and the south. And so a lot of the techniques that you'll see in, you know, various regions in Jiangsu, that has been influenced by other parts because of this canal. Yangzhou became this really big economic center as well. And so you have people from like Persia, you know, Arabic speaking countries coming in, bringing in, you know, like Muslim flavors. And so you will see some of that in Jiangsu as well. I'd say that this region, this province, is primarily known for the fact that it has a lot of waterways, it has a lot of lakes. And so you'll see a lot of like, you know, freshwater fish, various freshwater fish. You'll see plants like lotus root or water chestnuts. They also have like bamboo shoots, various shoots used in their cuisine as well, because there's just a lot of water. In terms of climate, it is mostly humid subtropical. Some of the cuisine is really characterized by intricate knife skills, its elegance and gourmet. Jiangsu cuisine is cuisine that is served in most formal events and banquets. So you'll see that kind of a thing. It reminds me of Shandong, but in Jiangsu, they will do that. I don't know if you've seen it on Instagram, where like they take a tofu and like literally they will like crisscross the tofu, and the tofu becomes like just so strand-like. It's like tiny, it's minute, and you can just see the knife work in that cuisine. And so I have read that everything in Jiangsu is kind of red because they like to pickle food in the wine, or they like to ferment the foods in wine. I think a key feature of the East that a lot of people say is that their foods tend to be sweeter, and there have been different explanations that I've heard and that I've read about. One, on like a more historic level, because Jiangsu, because Shandong, these places are more associated with the imperials and the dynasties and the kings, sugar was a valued thing. It was like a preferred thing. And so that kind of might have trickled down to this Jiangsu area, making it a little bit more sweet. But then there are current chefs that they weren't really talking about history, but they were just saying like, oh, well, you know, like back in the day, salt was, you know, equally hard and expensive, although Jiangsu is near the water. So I don't know how it all works. Salt mines and different salt trays were located in different parts of China, but I don't know how they did about what they did about sea salt. But what that chef said was that because salt was harder to come by, that sugar was like an easy thing to use to give food a lot of flavor, a lot of impact, but that it was just more available. So some of the kind of known dishes of this area: lion's head meatball. You have sweet and sour mandarin fish. So it is said that this region also likes kind of sweet and sour, but like, again, all regions do. Like this region also claims like beggar's chicken, but there have been several other regions that have also said like, oh, we also make beggar's chicken. So you have Yangzhou fried rice, you have something called brine boiled duck. You know, xiaolongbao is from Shanghai, but you know, you can lump that into this region as well. This region is also interesting because towards the end of the Opium Wars, there were different groups, the Brits, the French, that kind of moved into this region as well. And so sometimes you will see influences of that, kind of like a Shanghainese schnitzel. But Shanghai is its own thing and whatnot. So, yeah. Okay. I think I'm just gonna, this is what I'm going to just get to today. We're only going to do 4 today, because 8, this video would be forever. We're going to do a part 2 where I hit the smaller, there's the big 4, and then there's the later 4 that have been added in. So yeah, okay, that's it for now. Hope you all enjoyed. And yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back for part 2.